Hi, welcome to Chapter 8 Psychoanalytic Family Therapy. Psychoanalytical therapy had been around for a long time, but in the 1960s and 70s, it was rejected in exchange for family therapy. The therapists at that time didn't really see a place for individual psychoanalytic therapy in the trend and the new wave kind of a family therapy. Then in the 1980s, family therapists began looking at the psychology of the individual again and going back to some of the ideas of Freud and psychoanalysis, as well as some of the object relations theories and integrating this into family therapy. So, as object relations theory and self psychology became more conducive to family therapists, we saw a resurgence in this school of thought. When we talk about object relations therapy, we're talking about a theory that focuses on interpersonal relationships. So, this object relations theory kind of bridges the gap between psychoanalysis and family therapy, because in family therapy, we're looking at the relationships, where psychoanalysis was the study of individuals almost to an extreme. Ignoring the family or pulling the individual away from that family, as in many cases the family was believed to be the root of the person's problem. Therefore, to help them best, it would be to pull them away from that family. Now we know that selfhood and identity are formed and maintained through our relationships, both past and present, therefore giving psychoanalytic family therapy a place in the treatment of family issues. So we relate to people in the present based on early experiences with our primary caregivers. Also, when we talk about object relations theory, we need to look at formative relationships as internal objects. What we mean here is that these important formative relationships with caregivers, whether it's a mother, father, grandmother, whoever plays that role, children have a hard time developmentally separating and seeing that a person can be all good, not all good, I'm sorry, that a person can be both good and bad. In our concrete way of thinking as a child, developmentally, we're not able to see a person as having good and bad in them. We may idealize a father if he is responsive to our needs and he treats us nice. We see him as all good. However, if there's some type of trauma, such as abuse or shaming, or if that father is overly harsh or critical, then the child has to put him in the all bad objects category. And so this is a real hard concept for a younger child to handle. And so in the black and white mind of the child, we need dad to be an all good object in order for us to stay safely connected to him. And yet his behavior at times makes the child feel like dad is an all bad object. And so, what the idea is that splitting happens when the child splits off this bad part or that bad aspects of the father in order to maintain a relationship with that person, or in this case, we're talking about the dad. So, the child splits off the bad aspects of the father in order to maintain an image of his dad as safe and dependable. So, this theory is very useful when clients continue to sabotage work in their interactions with other people. Now, if we look at normal family development, how it ideally should go, we see that in psychoanalytic family therapy, we're drawing from object relations theory, attachment theory, and some other theories of self. And if you have done any studying about Freud, you know that the process of growth depends on the ego's relations with objects. First is actual interactions with real objects, and then later we have these unconscious residues of those early interactions. So in the very young child, um, we see them mirroring their parents. We see them idealizing their parents. And if these things don't happen developmentally in a healthy way, then the negative parts of those can carry over into later relationships. But when we have reliable and loving support from parents, then there is a successful completion of separation and individuation. So that child is free and confident and able to separate and become their own individual person. And this can happen. One of the terms they use is good enough mothering. With good enough mothering or good enough parenting, children can achieve this sense of identity. Now, the two necessary qualities of parenting for a secure and cohesive self are empathy and offering a model of idealization. And when we talk about empathy here, we're talking about um, the parent being able or the caregiver being able to say or express to them, I know how you feel. And then when we talk about the idealization, this would be the little child who can go, my mother is wonderful or my dad is a great person and I'm a part of that. And so, or I'm a part of him or her. And so that gives that child, excuse me, that gives that child a firm um, kind of a foundation or basis for their self esteem. Now, when we look at things from the psychoanalytic perspective, family development depends on the early development of the individual personalities that make up the family. And when we are looking at all the different personalities within the family, we're hoping that they've all been able to self actualize and be fairly healthy. And if the spouses are mature and healthy as adults, then the family that's formed will be harmonious. Now, what happens if there are some behavior disorders? The development of behavior disorders can occur from a couple of different situations. First, we've got the parents' failure to accept their children as separate beings. So, if we go back a slide and we're looking at, let's go back 2 slides. I'm actually taking you forward, sorry. We are looking for the child that is able to separate and individuate from the parent. If this does not happen, then we have children or young adults that become maladjusted. So when we're looking at this, like I said, the parents' failure to accept their children as separate beings, living their life through their child, totally kind of identifying through their child, um, scripting their child's life, and in very extreme forms, this can lead to the most severe psychopathology. There is, parents who have projected illnesses onto their children and different things. Now, some people have even linked anorexia nervosa to this inadequate separation and individuation. What we might find if these children are not able to actually separate from their parents, we either see two things. They either become very rebellious as a reaction to this unresolved dependency, and we know that they're not mature enough to go out and handle mature relationships. They're just running because that's the only way they know how to get away. Other things that we might see would be that they're not able to respond appropriately as adults to the different pressures that they may face, and they may revert back to more infantile behavior. The failure to develop a cohesive sense of self and a differentiated identity causes intense emotional attachment to the family, and as you can guess, this would handicap a person's ability to develop a social and family life of its own. This can also come into play when we're choosing a romantic partner or a marital partner. Freud believed that one's choice of marital partners is based partially on the desire to find someone who will complement and reinforce the unconscious fantasies that a person may have. He also coined the term false self. And what he was talking about here was that children or young adults or those seeking to marry behave as if they were perfect angels. They have this false self and they feel like they have to be perfect and suppress feelings that they might think would lead people to reject them. And so the idea that love is blind, according to Freud, would be that marital choice and dating and things is a time when we hide some of our own needs and our own feelings in order to win approval. During courtship, it's believed that most people present themselves in the best possible light. However, the powerful dependency needs, narcissism, impulses, and those things that we may be able to suppress before marriage will come out once we are married and spouses begin to relax and be more of their real self. What are some of the goals of therapy? When we're talking about psychoanalytical therapy, we are looking to free family members from unconscious restraints so that they can interact with one another as healthy individuals. And again, you can remember this in that Freud dealt a lot with the unconscious and looking at suppressed memories and those types of things. So, even though this is a very ambitious task, it's even more difficult to kind of um, define it in a way that's easy to understand. Basically, what we're trying to do is we're trying to help individual family members reintegrate the split off parts of themselves, parts that may be being repressed, um, parts that maybe they are denying because they don't see them as acceptable. Maybe there are parts of themselves or their personality that were not accepted as a young person but still are there. And so, as an adult, we're trying to help them become fully integrated and cohesive. When we look at therapy, we do a lot of listening in psychoanalytical therapy. So, after the roots of the current family conflict have been uncovered through a lot of listening and being very empathetic, then interpretations are made about how family members reenact the past. The idea is that our present day interactions are all kind of reenactments of relationships that we've had in the past. There are four basic techniques that help foster insight and help us facilitate the process of working through. These are listening, empathy, interpretation, and analytic neutrality. Now, when we look at these, you might think, well, these are all, basic techniques. This is what every therapist does. But we really want to emphasize the listening part because a lot of times, especially as beginning therapists, we might find that we're so busy trying to think of an answer or think of a solution or focus on what we're going to say next that we aren't truly listening. And so, as a therapist, you've got to really kind of push down that pressure to do something and focus on listening, because if you can listen and be neutral, kind of establish an analytic atmosphere, then you can concentrate on understanding what's going on. Not even so much the words or what is the subject of the argument, but what is the root of the feeling that the person is having in the argument. I like the example, if you'll look on page 160 in your book, on the right hand column in the gray box, it talks about the couple who was having an argument over the breakfast table. You know, the psychoanalytic therapist would not even necessarily be looking at solving the argument, which many times, if you're not careful, you'll find a couple will kind of drag you into the argument and figuring out who's right or wrong and things. But what you're going to try to stay focused on is, why did they get so angry? Why did that bother them so much? What, what did that trigger? What did that remind them of? What past experience have they had with that topic or in that situation that was a trigger? And so that's where, as a neutral party, the therapist can be very helpful, because you're not bringing all that other baggage and experiences to the argument. And you can kind of just ask that person, why did that statement upset you so much? Or why, was that such a big deal to you? Because it didn't seem like it was that big of a deal. So that's kind of what the analytic neutrality consists of. And then finally, as we're evaluating therapy, theory, and results, you can't always evaluate it based on how happy the family is, or, you know, those types of things. We really have to try to just be with the family and get to the root of what's going on. And we're not necessarily looking at symptom reduction. We're not necessarily looking at the absence of conflict. We've got to, as a therapist and with experience, use our own observations to evaluate the theory and the treatment, and if the therapy was successful.